17 NFL seasons, 9 Pro Bowls, inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2006. Warren Moon became the first African-American quarterback and the first undrafted quarterback to receive that honor, and he joined us. And Warren, I know there's a lot of football I want to get to with you and some tremendous memories and maybe some not-so-good memories when it comes to the league, but let's talk about out of the chute here. The fact that you had this sexual harassment lawsuit hanging over your head and now you've settled it. Where are we with that?
Well, basically it's over, and it's something that was not a very fun part of my life, for no question about it. Whenever you're accused of the heinous types of things that I was accused of, it's really something that you take very seriously, because I'm a guy that comes from a family of all women. I had 6 sisters and a mom. My dad passed away when I was young, so I have tremendous respect for women, and there's no way I would ever do any of these things that I was accused of. So I'm just glad this whole thing is behind me, and we've been able to move on and move forward and make this negative chapter of my life go away.
Well, I know when you and I used to do the fifth quarter and this first came up, we chatted about it, and you were adamant about going to trial because you really wanted to prove your innocence on this.
Yeah, I really did, and it was something that I felt very strongly about, but the way it was being conceived by them, they were just stringing it out. So this has been going on for almost 2 years now, and it was going to be almost another year before I actually got to trial. And this is just something in my life, especially at this age in my life, that I just wanted to get behind me and move on with my life, because it's kind of been hanging over me like a dark cloud, and I just wanted to move on. So I thought the best thing to do at this particular point was to settle it and move on.
You know, you've been away from the Seahawks organization and off the broadcast during this time because you took a leave of absence. How much did you miss being around it?
I missed it a ton, Paul, and you don't realize how much you miss this game until you're not around it. And I've been playing this game since I was 10 years old, organized-wise, so that's like some 52 years based off of how old I am right now. I've been involved in the game some way, some form or fashion every fall during that time. So to have that taken away from me and just be able to be a spectator and not be able to talk about it, not to be able to be around it, not to be able to be mentors of some of these young guys that I've been mentors to, it was really a tough period of time for me. But that's just something I had to go through, and I went through it, and I never would ever wish this on anybody as far as having to go through something like this.
You know, I want to talk about your family here right out of the gate, but I would imagine that your family gave you tremendous support.
No question about it. I mean, if it wasn't for them, to be able to lean on them, and they know who I am. They know who I am as a person, and all my friends as well. I heard from people all over, not over the country, but all over the world, that I've known and run into, that know my character and know what type of person that I am, that had my backing, and that makes you feel a little bit better about what you're going through. But it's still not easy, because there's a lot of other people out there that might be judging you and don't really know what the situation is, and sometimes you're perceived as being guilty in public opinion as opposed to being innocent until proven guilty.
And almost assumed guilty when you settle, too. Don't you think there's something to that, too?
I think there's a little bit of that because nobody actually knows what the actual settlement is. But, I didn't admit to any type of guilt or any type of wrongdoing, and I still feel strongly about that. And I wish I could have proved that out in the court of law. But like I said, it was just taking so long. It would have been stretched out so much longer, and it was something I just didn't want to deal with anymore.
All right, I want to talk about your family. You bring up your sisters. You had no brothers, 6 sisters. You learned to cook, sew, iron, and housekeep to help take care of the families. You grew up in Los Angeles. Did you master any of those domestic duties?
I really did. And my friends get on me all the time about how meticulous I am about everything that I do around the house. Now, I can't do anything under the hood of a car or anything mechanical like that, like most guys can. But when it comes to, keeping a house clean, when it comes to ironing, when it comes to sewing, when it comes to cooking, I can do all that type of stuff because my mom taught me to do all that at a very, very young age. So I took care of myself very well through college. Through the time I was playing up in Canada by myself, and any time that I had to live by myself throughout my pro career, which I did from time to time when I was traded, I had no problems taking care of myself.
So would you iron jeans and T-shirts?
Well, not so much jeans unless they had some bad wrinkles in them. I'd steam the wrinkles out, but no question I would iron shirts and slacks and things like that. And I iron my friends' clothes. I mean, when my friends come and stay with me, I ask them, "Do you need anything ironed?" Because I just enjoy doing that type of thing. It's something I've done all my life.
I got to admit, I mean, there was a time in my life where I was doing a lot of ironing too, and people would just laugh. I'm like, you know what? You have to.
Yeah,
this is just part of what we do.
It is. It's. I don't know if I get enjoyment out of it, but I like to look. I like to look clean and neat. And my mother always raised me to be that way. She ironed everything that we wore, and so I just got used to it because I saw her doing it, and I felt like that's what you needed to do in order to get yourself ready to go somewhere.
Well, I know how much you looked up to your mom and the things that she did for you when you were younger. Is it true that you could play only one sport in high school because you had to work the rest of the year to help the family?
Yeah, it kind of came to that towards the end of my high school career, my junior and senior year, that I had to pick one sport and go ahead and pick that sport and then work the rest of the time just so I could make money, not only for the family, but just for myself to have, like, for taking the bus to school, for lunches, for just different reasons I needed money for. I had part-time jobs after school my whole time in high school, so I started working basically when I was 12 years old in restaurants. And my mother's a guy that she was seeing after my dad died was a chef, and he used to work at different restaurants, and I always worked with him and did all the prep work in those restaurants. And I did basically everything you almost could do in a restaurant but serve food and serve alcohol because I wasn't old enough to do it. But everything behind the scenes I was basically able to do, and that's one of the reasons why I learned to cook as well. My mom taught me the basics of cooking, and then he taught me the more finer points of it.
Outside of that, was there a job you didn't like when you were in your youth?
Not really. Most of the jobs I picked were things that I really wanted to do. I had a paper route when I was a young kid. I threw papers on my bicycle. I worked as a after-school ball monitor at an elementary school. You pass out balls to the kids after school for the kids that had to stay around and wait for their parents to come pick them up. I mean, I did a little bit of everything, but my main job was in high school was I worked for the Veterans Administration, and I worked in their clerical department doing a bunch of filing work and stuff like that. That's where I made probably my best money as an after-school job.
Well, I want to, I know that when you played in high school football and, the recruitment wasn't that great, you went to 2 years at West Los Angeles College. How did you wind up at Washington?
Well, Washington recruited me, and they were recruiting my receiver at West LA Junior College. I was in my my freshman year, and he was a sophomore. So he had been there 2 years. I had only been there a year. But I wanted to leave because I never wanted to go there in the first place because I felt like I should have gotten a scholarship out of high school, but I just wasn't getting the offers to go to the schools that threw the football that I wanted to. I got a lot of smaller school offers, but none of the major schools. So that's why I decided to go to a junior college for a year, because my high school coach was going to the junior college as the offensive coordinator, so we were going to basically run the same offense we ran in high school. And when I had a really great freshman year to go along with my receiver who had a great sophomore year, he was being recruited by Washington and other schools. And they saw me on tape, of course, when they saw him, because I was the one throwing him the football. So they had a big interest in me, but my junior college coach didn't want me to leave because I had only been there a year. He wanted me to stay the 2 years, of course. And so he wasn't allowing people to come on campus to recruit me.
Wow.
And he was telling schools if they came on campus to recruit me, he wasn't going to allow them back on campus to recruit any other players. So I finally had a heart-to-heart talk with him and just told him that I really wanted to leave, that it probably wasn't going to be in the best interest of his program to have me stay there. And he finally decided that it was okay for these schools to come in and recruit me. So Washington was one of those schools. I think I was going to it came down to Washington and Colorado. I didn't want to stay in L.A. I was being recruited by USC and UCLA, but didn't want to stay there. I wanted to get outside of the state, stay on the West Coast, hopefully, but move outside of L.A. because I had been there my whole life. And I decided to go to Washington basically because Don James believed in me as a quarterback. He felt like I could be a big-time quarterback in college. I had a chance to start when I came up here, even though there was a fifth-year senior here. He gave me an opportunity to compete for the job because of the style of offense that he was going to run. So it worked out well for me coming up here as far as being able to play right away. But there were some very, very tough days in the beginning just because we weren't winning very much.
Well, that was huge for you, too. You didn't want to go anywhere where they wanted you to switch positions.
Right. Yeah, a lot of teams wanted me to switch positions. I remember I had committed to Arizona State in high school, and they were going to recruit me as a quarterback. Then all of a sudden they recruited the two top quarterbacks in the country that committed to go there, a guy by the name of Dennis Sproul and another guy by the name of Kevin, I think it's Bruce Hardy. He was from Utah, and Dennis Sproul was from somewhere in California. They decided to go to Arizona State, so now they said, we're going to switch you to defensive back because we got these two other quarterbacks that committed to us. So that's when I decommitted from Arizona State. Said, I'm not coming here because I'm going to play quarterback wherever I go.
Can you imagine being that coach looking back now saying, what were we thinking?
You know, it was Frank Kush.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I had tremendous respect for him as a coach because he was one of the best coaches at the time in college football. Even though Arizona State wasn't huge on the map, they won a lot of football games with him there, and he was known for having his Mount Kush and where he made all the players condition and that. And he ended up going to the NFL. I think he coached the Baltimore Colts for a while.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. Look, it's always fun to look back and see like who got drafted ahead of this person and who worked out and
yeah, the Bruce Hardy kid became a tight end, believe it or not. They moved him to tight end. And Dennis Sproul, I think he made it into the NFL, but never really made it in the league. He got into the league, but never really made it. So I outlasted all those guys.
Yeah. It's funny that it was so long ago, and you remember those two guys.
I remember everything that happened to me throughout my whole career.
Wow, man! All right, so 1978 NFL draft, 334 players taken through 12 rounds. Not one team drafted you. 3-year starter, won Rose Bowl MVP in 1978, and you look at that and you're like, how does that happen? How does Warren Moon go through an entire 12 rounds and not get picked?
Well, part of it is because I decided to sign in Canada prior to the draft. So I kind of knew maybe I wasn't going to get drafted high after that because of all the research we did, my attorney Lee Steinberg and I, about where I was going to go in the draft. It was basically our decision, and we just said, let's go ahead and sign in Canada because the NFL is not going to give you a chance to play quarterback. So once we decided to do that, we felt like, okay, we're probably not going to get drafted. And I was probably hoping I wasn't going to get drafted because if I didn't get drafted, I'd be a free agent if I ever wanted to come back to play in the league. So that was kind of part of our strategy. Go to Canada, continue to keep showing what you can do because they don't want you to play quarterback. And if you do decide to come back, now you're going to be a total free agent. You can go wherever you want to go. Nobody has your rights because if somebody would have drafted me just to keep my rights, then I would have had to go to that team if I would ever came back. So it really worked out well. Most guys are thinking they want to be drafted on draft day. Well, because of my situation at that particular time, I didn't want to be drafted, and I was like given the high five because I didn't get drafted.
Oh, that's makes it understandable. I mean, you played 6 years in the CFL, 5 straight Grey Cup victories, threw for over 21,000 yards. But you played up there for 6 years, Warren. I mean, I know you had tremendous success. You're winning all those Grey Cups, but why did it take you 6 years to leave there and finally get to the NFL?
Well, first of all, I was under contract, so I couldn't get out of my contracts. And believe it or not, Paul, after my third year or so there, I really was enjoying playing up there. And I thought I was going to play the rest of my career there. And they put together a huge package for me to stay there if I would have stayed after my fifth year. But I looked at it, and then in the back of my mind, there was still always that challenge and that dream of mine to play in the NFL and just to figure out how good I really as a player. And you really can't judge yourself on how good you are unless you play against the best players in the world. And even though Canada was a good league, the best players from top to bottom were in the National Football League. So I wanted to see how I measured up against those guys because I had kind of dominated that league up there from a team standpoint and an individual standpoint. But I really wanted to see how I measured up against the best players in the world. So that was one of the reasons why I decided to come back. And I ended up was able to negotiate out of my last year of my contract, and because I had another year left on it, and then I came on back.
But you must have, like you said, if you didn't like it up there, you would have bolted. right? I mean, you would have figured out a way to get out of those deals, but you must have really enjoyed playing.
I really did, because you were judged just by how you played, nothing else. There wasn't any color, there wasn't any racism. I never heard any type of negative taunts or anything like that, and that was totally different than what I heard right here in Seattle at the University of Washington. So it was just a refreshing way to play football and just to go out and play. And then when you're winning like we are, I mean, winning takes care of a lot of things. And even though I was very homesick at times being up there by myself, because I wasn't married when I first went up there my first few years, it gets really cold up there in the fall and in the winter when we're playing in the playoffs, and you're not away. You're away from home, and you're in a different culture. So that part of it was tough. But when you're winning on Sunday afternoons and you're continuing to win championships, that kind of makes a lot of that stuff go away. So if I wasn't winning up there all those years, maybe I probably would have decided to come back a little bit sooner. But you know, when you win 5 Grey Cups like that, 5 championship teams, those are memories you take with you the rest of your life, no matter where you did it. If I've won 5 championships in high school, as you know, 5 years in a row, or in Pop Warner, or in college, or wherever, those are things you never forget. Not too many people can say they've done that.
No, not at all. We'll talk about the cold. I mean, you and I have discussed this in the past, but the cold was brutal up there. You know, when it gets chilly down here in the NFL, people are like, oh, and you're like, this is nothing compared to up north.
It gets brutally cold up there. I mean, to the point where we have to change basically everything you wear in a football game. You know, our linemen and some of our linebackers are wearing broom ball shoes. They're not wearing football shoes in the game, because you're playing basically on grass, but it's frozen, and you're playing on a lot of it's ice. So you have to have the right types of shoes to wear, the right type of under covering under your uniform, so you at least kind of stay warm, but you don't want to be too cumbersome as far as the amount of stuff that you have on. So it's a constant adjustment of what you need to wear to get yourself to the maximum performance level when you play the game. So I got used to doing that only because we had to practice in it every day. So when we played in it in the game, we kind of knew exactly what we needed to wear, where other teams that came in to play us, like a BC Lions or somebody that came from basically Seattle's type of weather, they froze their tails off, and all they were worried about was staying warm, because it was a psychological thing, you know. So they're out there with all this stuff on. You could tell they weren't even running around right the way they were running on the field, because they had so much stuff underneath their uniforms trying to stay warm. And we're pretty much used to it, because we had practiced in it all week and we knew exactly what to wear. So psychologically, we already had most teams beat when they came in to play us in the playoffs.
But back then, I mean, there probably was not much of an indoor facility, if any, to practice in. And plus, like you said, it wouldn't make much sense if you're playing outside on Sunday. But what about as a quarterback? How do you keep your hands warm? Like, what was the secret back then?
I had a jersey. Basically, our equipment guys made me a jersey that had fur. I mean, actual fur inside the pockets of the jersey. So I could stick my hand inside those fur pockets as soon as the play was over. And my hands stayed pretty warm I kept them in there up until the snap of the ball, until I had to put my hands up on the center. And the key is to keep your feet warm and to keep your hands warm. If you can keep the two nerve-ending parts of your body warm, you're going to have a pretty good chance of staying pretty warm in the game. So you had to make sure you had the right type of socks on. Like I wore wool socks. I had to put baby powder or some type of powder inside my shoes to keep my feet from sweating, because once your feet start to sweat, then that's going to turn into cold. And so there's all these little things you had to do to adjust to playing in the cold. But we ended up getting it done, and the cold never really bothered me as far as when I played, because I always had pretty good games in the cold.
Okay, so we get to 1984. You make your switch to the NFL at that point. You've probably told this story a million times, but how does that transition work to get you from the CFL to the NFL?
Well, throughout the time that I was up there, you know, scouts were always coming to our games, not only just to watch me, but to watch, you know, players on my team, players on other teams that we were playing against, because scouts are everywhere. So teams had a pretty good beat on who I was. There were certain teams more interested than others. When it came right down to it, there was about 6 teams that we felt like had a really good interest and needed a quarterback. And so those were the teams we kind of focused on, and that's where we started our negotiating once we started to come back. So I took visits to the New York Giants, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, to the New Orleans Saints, the Raiders, the Houston Oilers, of course, and then the Seattle Seahawks. So those were the teams it kind of came down to. And then as we whittled it down, it came down to Seattle and Houston. And Seattle is where I wanted to play because this is where I was living in the off season with my family. My wife loved it here. We went to school at the University of Washington. All of her friends were here. So this was our first choice. But the contract just wasn't coming out the way we wanted it to be as far as the guaranteed money and that type of thing, the structure of it. And Houston was willing to do basically whatever I wanted to do to bring me there. Plus my former CFL coach, Hugh Campbell, was the head coach at Houston at that time. So those were two things that really kind of swayed me towards going to Houston, even though Seattle was my first choice. And it was a huge, huge decision for me to turn down the opportunity to play here. But I had to do it because I didn't know how much longer I was going to play. I'm already 6 years into my career. I had a 5-year deal in front of me. That makes my career 11 years. I don't know how much more I would have played after that. So I went ahead and took the money that I knew was guaranteed and that it was a situation where I could feel comfortable with because of the head coach.
Yeah, I would imagine he knew what he was getting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to play for Chuck Knox because Chuck Knox was the coach of the Rams when I was a young kid growing up in L.A. So I was a big fan of his. So he was a coach that I wanted to play for, and this was a city that I wanted to play for. But again, money became the biggest issue, and the fact that I had a head coach also that knew me.
Well, and you had to figure ground Chuck, right? Didn't he have that reputation where you guys were just going to run the football?
He did, but he also knew that what the strengths of his players were, and he wasn't going to make me become some just handoff guy. Even Dave Craig threw the ball a lot with him, but I might have thrown it just a little bit more because of the style of quarterback that I was. But I loved the fact that I was going to be coming to a team that was going to be a little bit more balanced as far as running the football. Because, I threw the ball everywhere that I was. Up in Canada, I threw it all over the place, and most of my career in the NFL, I had to always throw it a lot. I wanted to be on teams that had a little bit more balance to it, just to take a little bit of the pressure off of me and make us a little bit more less one-dimensional.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I want to take you back to those Los Angeles Rams days. I know those were your team growing up. Most of us have childhood idols and heroes, football heroes. Like, give me a couple guys when you were a kid. You're like, wow, he was the best.
Well, I really looked up to Roman Gabriel, who was the quarterback of the Rams at that time. He was an Indian, so he was a minority, and he was a guy that I could look at and say, me being a minority as well, maybe there's a chance for me to be in the NFL one day. Jimmy Jones was a quarterback at USC at that time who was an African-American. Believe it or not, O.J. Simpson was one of my big idols back then because he was such a great player at USC. He had his problems later on, but back there in college when I was growing up, he was everything. He won the Heisman Trophy. I mean, just one of the greatest running backs to ever play the game. And then Roger Staubach, because I was a big Dallas Cowboys fan outside of the Rams, and I just love the way he played the game because he could run the ball, he could scramble, he could throw the football, and then he had this this Christian lifestyle off the field. So he was just what you call the perfect football player. He had been a veteran. I guess he played for the Army. He served time in the service. So this guy was like the complete person to me as far as an athlete and a person and a quarterback. So Roger Staubach was somebody I really looked up to.
It's funny, I grew up in Dallas, and so my dad was an avid Cowboys fan. I remember watching those games because back then that's all you got was maybe a couple of games on a Sunday, and you just lived and died for those Sunday afternoon games. But Staubach's daughter went to school with my sister, and it was kind of like one of those fun things where he'd come over to the house and he'd come to pick her up, and I'd be like, wow, Roger Staubach.
That's how I was when I first met him. I was in awe of the guy, even though I had done all these things in the NFL. But to me, Roger Staubach or Bart Starr or Johnny Unitas or all those type of guys were like gods to me.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Those first few years in Houston, too, were pretty lean. What do you remember about those years?
They were tough because we were building. They had stripped the whole team down, and we were building basically through the draft. So we had a very young offensive line. Bruce Matthews was on that offensive line, but he was only in his first year. Mike Munchak was on that offensive line in his second year. These two guys both made the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Dean Steinkuhler, who was the #1 overall pick the year I came in, he ended up having a knee injury, but he was another guy that they were kind of building. So they were building in the right places, building around me, but it was going to take time. And when you have a team that's so young and doesn't really know how to win, and a new coach as well, we did have some lean years in the beginning, but we finally turned things around in like our third year and started really winning football games.
What was the key when you turned it around? Did you start getting receivers and running backs like talented, skilled guys?
Yeah. When you drafted a guy like Haywood Jeffries in the first round, I think in my fourth year, Ernest Givens was drafted in the second round, and we traded and got Drew Hill from the Los Angeles Rams. So we were starting to build a football team with great personnel, and we were doing the same thing on defense. So it just took a little bit of time. What it takes, to build a team. And back then, you had a little bit more time to actually build a team than you do today.
More
and then there wasn't free agency back then, so you had to do it basically through the draft.
Yeah. Of all of your playoff runs and the teams, you made a strong run with the Oilers. Think back of the team that you think maybe had the best shot to win it all, maybe the most talented team. Which one would that be?
I think our 92 team or our 93 team. Those two teams, the one that in 92, I think that's when we lost to Buffalo in the big comeback game. I thought that team was good enough to win a Super Bowl, and then the next year everybody thought we would never be able to overcome that and get over that as a team, but we went 12-4, won 11 games in a row the next year, and we got beat in the last couple of minutes by Joe Montana in the playoffs. But those were two teams that I thought had a chance to really win Super Bowls, basically because of what we did during the regular season. The teams that we beat during the regular season, like Dallas, had won the Super Bowl, I think, in 90. I think they won it in 92, and we beat them pretty handily during the regular season. So we knew how our team measured up against the best teams.
Okay, so you bring up the Buffalo game in '92. You're up 35-3. The Bills rally to beat you guys 38-35. We've had off-camera conversations about this, Warren, but what happened in that game? What stands out to you?
We just didn't put our foots on their throats when we had them down, and we allowed them to get back into the game, and we allowed the momentum to change. And once the momentum changed, especially on the road, it's a hard thing to get back. And they made some plays. You got to give them a lot of credit. Our defense did some things defensively that kind of prevented us from being the aggressive defense that we were being in early in the ballgame. We became more of a prevent defense, and it allowed them to get back in it. I mean, they converted an onside kick during that comeback. We missed a field goal during that comeback. We mishandled a snap on a field goal, another easy field goal. I mean, we just had our chances to win, and we just did not get it done. We didn't convert enough third downs to keep the chains moving and to keep possession of the football. So everybody could have played a much better game in the second half, and we have nobody to blame but ourselves for losing that football game. But again, once that momentum turned in their favor, I've never seen momentum change in a football game like that, and it was like a big snowball that we couldn't stop. We just could not stop it.
Yeah, I mean, as a fan, I'm sitting there watching, and it's 35-3. I'm like, by then everybody's gone. They're maybe flipping the channels, and I'm sure when people came back. But I noticed with you when we chat about it here and there that it's not a good topic for you.
No, it isn't, and it's something that because you only get so many chances to possibly play in a Super Bowl throughout your career, unless you're Tom Brady or somebody like that. But you got to make the most of those opportunities because you don't never know when you're going to be back in the playoffs again. So to have those opportunities and let them slip away like that, as a player, those are things you're going to remember the rest of your life because that's why you play the game. You play the game to try and win a championship, regardless of what level you're playing at. And Super Bowl was the level that we were playing for then. And I never got a chance to play in one. I say I never got a chance. I never got a chance because we didn't earn it. We didn't earn the chance to play. So I regret that. And I did so many things in my career that I'm proud of, so many things in my career that I never thought I would be able to accomplish. But I do have regrets, and that's one of the biggest regrets that I'll ever have playing is that we didn't win that game. That winning that game does not guarantee us we're going to the Super Bowl, but it really put us on our way if we win that game.
Yeah, you accomplished so much in your NFL career. It's ridiculous. I mean, if you threw in your Canadian football yards, you threw for over 70,000, but you came within 675 yards of throwing for 50,000 in the NFL. So does that sit out there too as one of those things or do you just not think about
that? That one doesn't, no, because when I left the game, I was like my third all time. So I couldn't do any more than what I could do as a player. I knew there were 6 years that if I could have had maybe 1 or 2 of those years back and being in the NFL, who knows? I would have been over 50,000. But I'm really proud of the things I was able to accomplish in both leagues because it showed my versatility. It showed that it didn't matter what type of system you put me in, I was going to be successful in it. And even in the NFL, I played on 4 different teams. And on 3 of those teams, I made Pro Bowls on 3 of them. So I could go wherever you wanted me to play and play in any style, and I could still make things happen. And that's something that not a lot of quarterbacks can say. And I'm the only player that has ever been inducted into both Football Hall of Fames, the CFL and the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Yeah. So I'm the only player that can say that, and there's only one coach that can say it. Who was that? Bud Grant. Bud Grant was a coach at Winnipeg, and he went in the Hall of Fame in Canada, and then he came to the Vikings and had great years there too.
Well, I know you came to the Seahawks later in your career, and you only played for the Seahawks for 2 years, and you went to Pro Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a statement in itself too. Before we get into that, I do, we talked about the 92 game, but I remember flipping on the Chiefs-Oilers game when I first moved out here, and that was billed as kind of the heavyweights. They had this Metallica song going in the beginning of the pregame, and it's you, and it's Joe Montana, and it's like this real great buildup. Did you feel that during the week going into that game?
Probably not as much as most other people. One of the things I was able to do throughout my career, and I just felt it was very smart, was I stayed away from any media. I only did the media that I had to do as a player, the interviews that I had to do. And then I had a segment I did on the sports called Quarterback Corner, and I did that as far as giving my thoughts on that week's game or whatever. But as far as watching anything or listening to anything, I stayed away from all that. I didn't read the papers, and I felt like that was the only way I could have the type of relationship that you needed to have with the media as a quarterback if you didn't know what was being said about you. So I didn't want people saying anything to me about what was being said about me. Yeah. I didn't want to read any of it, and that way I had a really good relationship with all the guys that I had to do interviews for, and I could be honest, and I didn't have any grudges against anybody. So I didn't really hear as much about the buildup of that game, even though I could imagine what it was just because of the quarterbacks that were involved and the teams that were involved.
And that game itself was at your place.
Yeah.
So
and we jumped out to a lead again, and I thought we had a comfortable lead, but again, we just didn't play well in the fourth quarter, and that's where we lost the football game. We either didn't score enough or we gave up too many points in the fourth quarter. And like I said, Joe Montana had a drive in the last 2 minutes to beat us, and that was our downfall.
But you knew, much like yourself, a guy like Montana was known for that.
Right.
So you're sitting there probably going, be careful, fellas.
Right. And for me as a quarterback, you want to say, okay, let's get a big enough lead to where he can't come back, where you got enough points in front of him that he couldn't come back, but we didn't do that. And their defense kind of kept them in the game and kept them around long enough for Joe to work some miracles.
I mentioned you played in the Pro Bowl. You played in 9 Pro Bowls, but one of those Pro Bowls was with the Seahawks. What should the NFL do about the Pro Bowl? Is it time to? It seems like it's an annual discussion.
Yeah, from the NFL standpoint, it's still a spectacle of your best players, supposedly your best players, even though so many guys bail out of it. And it still gets a better rating or a higher rating than a lot of the baseball or basketball playoffs. Yeah. Believe it or not, they still get some pretty high ratings. So from a marketing standpoint and from a money standpoint, if you're the NFL, as long as people continue to watch football, no matter what you're putting out there, you go ahead and keep doing it. So I understand why the league is still doing it, but I wish the players would be a little bit more serious about it and not bow out of the game. A lot of guys don't want to play because they're fear of getting hurt. I don't think there's a lot of money involved to make it worth a player's effort to go out there and play. And if you want to get players to play, then you raise the amount of money that you offer them to play in that game, because these guys are making $20, $30, $35 million a year. They're not going to risk going out to play in a game like this for $50,000 or whatever they're being paid. So that's one of the things I think the league could do in order to get players maybe to to play a little bit more, or have this huge pot, maybe a winner-take-all type of pot, and maybe the players would want to play for something like that. You make it $3 or $4 million that the players split up, or more than that, and then winner take all, and make it a little bit more of a pride thing. Because when we played it, the players weren't making as much money. And that was something that we looked at as a good little bonus going into the off season if you could win the game, because the winner definitely got, I think he got almost double the amount of what the loser got. So that was something that was an incentive. And then also we had a lot of pride. The AFC against the NFC, we wanted to win that game, kind of like Major League Baseball. The baseball makes it where the National League or the American League, there's an incentive there to win that game, because I think it used to be the winner got home field in the playoffs. Right. I don't know if they do that anymore.
It's still
so it gives you an incentive to play the game hard and play it the right way, and then their best players play in those games. Yeah. They're very rarely backing out of those games. So the NFL needs to do something to get the best players to continue to want to play in it.
No, I mean, you hit on the head that baseball's all-star game is always the most competitive, and there is that little incentive too. But the Pro Bowl, when you see guys switching positions out there too, you're like, oh man,
they're making a joke of it, and it shouldn't be that way. And guys aren't tackling out there, and it's just not what it should be. And the league needs to do something if they're going to continue to keep putting that product out there, because it doesn't look good for the league to not having the high caliber performances out there, even though people are still continuing to watch.
If there was a player in NFL history that you could watch or you could play with, boy, so many to choose from. But is there someone you wish you could have thrown the ball to?
Jerry Rice.
Yeah,
I got a chance to throw it to him in a couple of Pro Bowls, and just the way he practiced and the way he prepared, and then what he did in games. I mean, he was a guy that I would have loved to. And then Randy Moss is another guy, just because of his sheer speed and athleticism. I wish I could have threw the ball to him some, because he was quite a player as well. And he came to Minnesota, I think, a year after I left, when I came here to Seattle, and I wish I could have had at least 1 year with him.
Yeah, that would have been fun to watch. You played until you were 44, and the way I see it is you were only behind George Blanda, which is everybody's going to wind up behind him. I think he was like 48 or at least 46.
46.
Yeah, and then Steve DeBerg was another one who played late. So I had you as the third oldest NFL quarterback, active quarterback, at 44 years old.
That's probably right, and even Vinny Testaverde, I think, was in there too. He might have been the oldest one to ever start a game. I think they brought him out of retirement. I think the Jets did one year at like 44, and he started a game because of injuries. But you're going to see some guys playing a little bit longer because of the way they're protecting the quarterback now, the way that these guys really know their bodies and know their training regimens, they know what to eat, they know supplements, all those different things that take to make themselves play a little bit longer and at a higher level at an older age. But then you're also going to see a lot of guys not play as long because of the fear of head injuries. You see a lot of guys that are retiring early now, like a Gronkowski and different guys retiring at a very young age. And these guys are making so much money, they don't have to play as long as some of the other guys did. So you're going to see both, depending on how much they love the game. Like Tom Brady, he's got nothing really to play for except for the love of the game and the pride that he wants to continue to keep playing. But you see him out there still now at 42 years old. So I don't know how many guys are going to play at his level that long, but guys will be able to play longer only because of the way they're able to take care of their bodies and the way that they're being protected.
Well, I mean, I look back at you and you talk about guys playing at that level at that age. You still had a lot of game. Like do you remember your last game you started and what age you were?
Yeah, I was 44. I started in that last year with the Chiefs, and I could still play the game. Yeah. But when you're not a starter, because I don't remember the reason. I think I didn't start because Elvis Grbac got hurt. But when you're not a starter, you lose a little bit of something. You start to lose a little bit of your competitiveness, and you lose that love for the game that you had so many years. And I knew when I didn't want to train anymore in the off season, it was going to be time for me to retire, because that's where you put the time in. Especially as you get older, you have to put more time in to get yourself ready to play than you do when you're younger. So the training part of it is what really got to me in the off season. It's like when I don't want to get up every day and go to the gym, or when I don't want to get up every day and go run stairs or run sprints or go throw. That's when I know it's time for me to leave the game, because I'm not going to get myself to the stage where I felt like I need to get to in order to play at a high level. So that's when I felt like, okay, it's time for me to give it up.
You know, to go to your 44 and to keep that regimen, man, it's impressive and shows why you've accomplished so much in your football career. I noticed something this year where the Black College Football Hall of Fame had a football game finally, inducting its 10th class. They finally get this football classic, they called it. What's the importance of incorporating an annual game with the induction ceremony? Like, how big is that? Because they moved the Black College Football Hall of Fame to Canton,
right, to the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
which is great.
Yeah, and it's great support for them. And there's a number of historically black college players in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So a lot of those guys were at that game this past weekend. Mel Blount and who else?
Maybe guys like Willie Lanier.
Willie Lanier was another one. There's probably some 20, 21 guys that are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame that are all from historically black colleges. So to have all those guys back there was great. To have it all at the Pro Football Hall of Fame was a great move for them, because it creates more exposure for the Black College Hall of Fame. And then the game, I guess, was a pretty good game. Came right down to the last 3 seconds. Was it Tennessee State?
It was, I think, Morehouse.
No, Morehouse and
Alabama
State.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and it was a really good game. So all of that was a great positive experience, for the Black College Hall of Fame and the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And then the stadium is first class. They've remodeled the stadium, so it's a really good place for having games like that. So you're going to see more games like that. At some point, they want to have an NFL game, a regular season game, at the Pro Football Hall of Fame throughout the season.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
I look at those inductees and the years and the classes they had, and of the 10 classes, and the names in there are unbelievable. Guys that I think there's close to 30 that are in both, but there's guys that aren't in the Pro Football Hall of Fame that are in the Black College Hall of Fame. And the names are just impressive.
Yeah, it really is, and it just goes to show that it doesn't matter what type of school you go to, how big, how small. If you can play the game, they're going to find you, and you're going to make a name for yourself. And there's a lot of guys that went to historically black colleges that didn't necessarily get the recognition or the exposure because of where they played. But NFL scouts will find you, and they'll bring you into the National Football League, and then the rest is up to you to make a name for yourself. And a lot of those guys did.
Well, as you know, this time of year, a lot of those guys they don't have a place to play now. So the XFL is coming. And give me a quick thought on the XFL, because we talk about the Pro Bowl ratings being so strong. People are so football starved in February. This is a chance for maybe them to capitalize. Do you think they'll finally be able to establish a spring football league?
I hope so, and a lot of it comes down to dollars and cents. You have to have the money in order to sustain a league like that, especially in the beginning, until it gets off the ground, until people recognize what it is, the players who are in it, identify with those players, know when it's on television, where to go and find it, all those things. You need money to keep that going for a while until people figure that out. And that's what happened with the AAF. It just couldn't sustain financially. But I think that with Vince McMahon behind this league and the financial backing that they supposedly have, and they have a guy running it in Oliver Luck, who was my backup in Houston. He's Andrew Luck's dad. He knows what he's doing. He was a commissioner of NFL Europe, so he knows how to run a football league. So this is something that the NFL really, really needs, because there are a lot of guys who aren't necessarily ready to play in the NFL right away. They need a little bit more of grooming. They need minor leagues in baseball, or they need like a D league in basketball. In football, you need the same thing. These guys need a little bit more time to develop. And you need time to develop not only just players, but you also want to develop coaches, you want to develop trainers, you want to develop equipment people, and that keeps your product and your sport at a high quality level when you're replacing people coming in. So you look at some of the players who played in NFL Europe, like a Kurt Warner or Brad Johnson, or some of those guys that went on and won Super Bowls. If they didn't have the NFL Europe as like a spring league for them to continue to keep growing, who knows what would happen to those guys' careers. So this is a league that's really needed. So hopefully, I hope it does succeed, because these young players do need an opportunity to continue to keep getting better.
And the partnership would be a big thing for them if they could get with the NFL and partner up.
I know it. I know they want to try and do this thing independently at first to show that they can, but there's no question, if you have the NFL's backing, if you're not trying to compete with them, why not partner with them and get their support and get whatever guidance they could do to help you to make that league successful? Because it's not only going to help the league, the XFL, but it's also going to help the NFL down the road when these players and these coaches and these trainers and all come into the league at some point, and just continue to keep making your product the top product that there is in the world, because NFL football right now is the top product that there is.
Any interest in you like doing a Jim Zorn thing where you go in there and help out coaching maybe a little?
I would love to maybe be a consultant or something like that, but on a day-to-day basis, no. No. I've been asked many times about being a coach when I retired from the game, but I put in 23 years of it, and I put a lot of time in every day, from being one of the first guys in every day and when the last guy is gone. And it's a tremendous commitment to be a player, but it's even more tremendous commitment to be a coach. And I have great respect for the guys that do that. But I would love to be able to be a consultant and be around it and maybe lend some expertise, but on a day-to-day basis, probably not.
Yeah, but you do that a lot with the Cam Newtons, the Russell Wilsons. Yeah. Like you're really involved with
I'm
guys.
In contact with those guys all the time, always trying to give them encouragement. I'm looking at them play and watching things that they do and see how they handle themselves in public and how they handle themselves in interviews and things like that. So I'm always giving them pointers if I can, or some type of positive advice that if I possibly can, if I feel like they're going through a tough time. So, yeah, that's kind of what I feel like my role is being a former player right now.
I noticed on your Twitter handle, you and Russ still have that picture. It's just the two of you on your Twitter profile. Can you is your relationship? Can you talk a little bit about that relationship with Russ and how what you think of Russell at this point in his career? Yeah,
I mean, Russell is. I'm so proud of the way he's handled everything in his career, not only on the field but off the field, and it hasn't been a completely smooth ride for him, especially with his own football team from time to time with players on his team. But the way he's handled all those things and continued to still keep getting better as a player. His career continues to keep getting better. Every year he seems to get a little bit better as a quarterback, and that's what you want. You want one of those careers where it's a steady incline as far as what you're doing, on the field, and then what he's doing off the field. He's gotten more involved in the community off the field. He's doing great things with his foundation. He's invested into some of the sports teams here in Seattle to try and keep them here, like the Sounders. And so he's doing all the right things and making all the right moves. And, again, I'm proud of the way he's been able to navigate through, what's happened on his own football team in the locker room with some of the negativity and still continue to come out on top. And
at the $35 million a year, it's pretty easy, I would think. Well, maybe not. Maybe as an outsider looking at it, it seems easy that it would go to your head and your production would fall off. But boy, he's like you said, even at that big payday, he's continuing to get better.
Yeah, and you see he signs that huge deal this offseason, but he comes in this year looking the best that I've seen him look probably since his second or third year in the league, as far as the way his body looks and how lean he is and how quick he looks. And I think you're going to see him use his legs a little bit more and get back to being that type of Russell again that he was early in his career, that he kind of got away from the last couple of years. He's throwing the ball just magnificently right now from what I've watched in the practices that I've seen. He has a really good understanding and a good feel for what the offense is giving him right now. Coach Schottenheimer has really incorporated things that Russell does best in the play-action game. I think they've put a better offensive line in front of him where he feels a little bit more confident of sitting and staying in the pocket as opposed to having to scramble all the time. So there's a lot of good things on the offensive side for the Seahawks that kind of get them back to maybe where they were in 2013.
Let me ask you one last question, just to throw this at you, because it's completely off the wall, Warren. And I can't imagine you came in today and said, I know he's going to ask me this. Your movies, I looked at your movie chart. You know, where was Warren Moon cast in some movies? Was he a Hollywood guy? Like Joe Namath did some movies, but he seemed to have much bigger roles than maybe you wanted to. But you played a coach in the movie Any Given Sunday, right?
Yes,
and
sir.
you also had a cameo in Jerry Maguire.
Yep.
So being around Hollywood and being involved in something like that, for us that'll never get that experience, what was it like kind of being in there, kind of rubbing shoulders with those guys and elbows with those guys?
You know, it was a fun experience because when you're in sports, you're basically an entertainment. You know, you're an entertainer, and we just entertain on the football field or on the court or whatever, where these guys actually do it on the screen. But I think there's deep down inside of every athlete, he'd love to be a singer or an actor if he could. And in every actor or every singer, he probably wants to be an athlete at some point. There's that dream of maybe being able to do that. So to be able to actually go inside of a movie set and see what all goes on behind the scenes, it was a great experience. But it was something I probably wouldn't want to do on a consistent basis, because it is a lot of sitting around doing nothing. I mean, there is more production work as far as setup and takedown and move sets and move scenes and all that stuff, and you're sitting around just waiting for your chance. And you might go out there and do a 10-minute scene, then you might wait another 3 or 4 hours before you do anything again. So that would drive me nuts, because as a player, you're used to being active all the time when you're doing whatever you're doing. In acting, that's where the respect comes in, when those guys can sit around for all those hours and all of a sudden go out there and do some scene that makes them just become one of the great actors of all time after sitting around waiting to make that happen, because all this set and location and camera lighting and all that has to be done first before you can actually do that.
Well, I'm sure the actors were starstruck seeing you guys in those studios, but at the same time, was there a moment where you were starstruck, where you caught a glimpse of somebody and said, "Woof, man"?
No question. When I met Tom Cruise, I mean, he's such a nice guy and such a low key guy, but this is Tom Cruise. You know, this is Top Gun. This is what's the movie where he's dancing with the underwear on? I mean, this is a big time
Risky
actor.
business.
Yeah, and you get a chance to rub elbows with a guy like that, and he wants to know more about what you're doing as an athlete than you want to know about him as an actor. So there's a respect factor right away, but you're definitely in awe when you meet somebody like that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, that's really cool. Well, it's great catching up with you, Warren, and I really appreciate the time today, and we'll have to do it again for sure.
No question, Paul. Great talking to you, and look forward to talking to you soon.